Xiao Xuan sat in a remodeled bus and looked at the multitudinous mountains outside the window. Summer solstice had just passed and the mountains were brimming with greens that burst with life. Seeing such a scene after living long in the city made his mood, despondent due to failures, quite brighter. Initially, Xiao Xuan planned to call up a few friends for a journey far away to unwind his heart, but he didn't expect to come across his fellow townmate and classmate who studied archaeology, Shi, who then pulled him over for an archaeology trip. Now, they were heading towards a relatively remote small mountain village. It was said that things of the Stone Age were discovered there. A batch of people had already set off for that location and currently, they were in the second batch. Xiao Xuan listened to his classmates start from the primitive human skull to the stone tools they used to the murals on rocks. He even took out a few pictures and explained them in detail. The researchers did this and that. After drilling in, it was hard to pull it back out. Although Xiao Xuan didn't understand a thing, he still gave face to him and listened attentively. On the paper were murals that archaeologists had discovered. Xiao Xuan glimpsed at them and felt they were no better than his nephews and nieces who had yet to even enter kindergarten. The lines on the drawings were rather simple. For most of them, one could tell they were people who held tools for hunting, as well as a few drawings of various species of animals. For the rest, however, he did not have a clue what they were. This is a drawing of a goat. But this goat drawing is too big, Xiao Xuan said as he pointed at a picture. On the picture, the drawing was a goat with a very long and large curved horn. By its side, there was a person holding a bow and arrows. Yet, the ratio did not seem normal. The head of the person reached only up to the goat's back. A few other pictures were the same. A rabbit's body proportion was akin to a lion, and on the left, there was even a picture of a horse, though its tail was drawn perhaps a bit too short. Of course, not every single drawing's ratio was like that. The different era's mural styles discovered in different provinces were all distinct. At the back, the ratios were drawn a bit more like reality. On the drawings, you could even see a group of people bringing dogs for hunting. He continued flipping back and found several colored drawings, giving an even clearer look to them. Oh, this drawing is even more ridiculous. The antler is too large. And this person, the person in the drawing just now only reached the goat's back, yet in this drawing, the person only reaches the height of this deer's leg. What's that in the bottom right corner? An 8-legged alligator. Xiao Xuan could not admire the style of the primitive human's drawing. They may not have put much emphasis on things like these, Shi explained. You mean that when they draw, they did not have any realism in terms of proportion, and instead used exaggerated methods? Xiao Xuan asked. It should be like that. Shi scratched his head. After all, in that time period, humans were not too educated in beauty. The drawings may only represent some sort of symbolic meaning. There was once a researcher who, when studying the murals, hypothesized that the reason why humans back then drew these hunting-related murals on cave walls or boulders was to let the tribe's hunters or warriors have an idea in their hearts before heading out. Or, perhaps there was a ceremony we don't know of, especially so for the murals drawn by those shamans. Shamans, in Xiao Xuan's mind, an image of a very odd and old swindler appeared. Ah, why do you have such a face? Let me tell you this, shamans back then did not necessarily hold low positions in human tribes. Quite oppositely, it's very possible they held high ones. I know. Swindlers, right? Xiao Xuan nodded. Shi waved his finger left and right, then took out a folder. In it were some copies of scanned drawings. As he pointed at some of the drawings and characters, Shi said to Xiao Xuan, if the appearance of totems is humans' personification of nature and their own collective unity, that means the thoughts of shamans are humans' naturalization. The occupation of shaman has actually already appeared in the Stone Age. Shi then started to talk about the development of the occupation of shaman from the ancient times to the present ones, without caring about Xiao Xuan. The usage of specialized jargon and even quoting various classics and works, causing Xiao Xuan who was listening to have a headache. Xiao Xuan did not have too great of an understanding in that field, nor did he feel interest. If he didn't have an old townmate and classmate who studied archaeology, Xiao Xuan would have simply not bothered knowing anything of those things. Before, when he heard people talk about archaeology, he immediately thought of those priceless antiques. However, the direction of study Shi took was simply more antique than antiques. It was so ancient that not many people felt interest towards the topic. Several days ago, Xiao Xuan was even listening to the broadcast's discussion on whether Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was correct, or the hypothesis on aliens created life forms was correct. Since he had nothing better to do, Xiao Xuan gave it a listen. After doing so, he put it aside and did not study it any further. On the contrary, Xiao Xuan knew he had interest in ancient human species from a young age. Back then, during middle school, he often had discussions with others regarding several excavated yet disappeared ancient human species remains in recent modern history. You won't understand if I speak professionally, so I'll go simpler. Look. Shi-Chi used his finger to point at a map on a certain location. Shaman is mentioned in ancient inscriptions on things such as cow bones, turtle shells, and bronze. But, it's like this. Xiao Xuan looked at the place Shi-Chi pointed towards. It was a symbol, looking akin to the interweaving of two work characters. On a few ancient potteries and statues, this double work symbol has appeared. On that topic, shamans also affected areas such as hunting, praying, and rescuing. Looking at it in certain perspectives, shamans can be counted as the scientists of that time. However, all of this is speculation. Even if it's records from ancient times, they may not be true. After all, they love to exaggerate. Isn't there a saying that goes, there is never truth in history? Archaeology is merely digging up a few corners and edges. As for the truth, who knows? The discovered cave this time is also related to shamans. The final few pictures you saw were the murals the first batch of people sent back. In the cave, the double work symbol was also discovered. So, we can speculate that it may be a certain shaman's residential area. Last month, a brief earthquake occurred in that village's region. Most likely, due to that, this cave was exposed. Before the earthquake, not a single person had heard of it. When he spoke up to there, Shi-Chi closed the folder and carefully looked at his surroundings. Seeing that the instructor and other students were not paying attention at them, he lowered his voice and secretively said to Xiao Xuan, "I've heard the first person who discovered the cave was a child. Moreover, from a fellow student's news, the child who discovered the cave saw a strange watermelon-sized insect crawling out from his courtyard's wall. Children have great nerves, so that child followed the insect. In the end, it disappeared at the cave. The child went back, notifying adults, and only then was the cave discovered. Watermelon-sized insect." Xiao Xuan felt it to be ridiculous. Regardless of who, when they heard that the first time, they would think it was overly fake. That child lied. Shi-Chi shook his head. The strange thing is, according to the first batch of people who went there, that there are ancient life-form fossils in the rocks used to construct the courtyard's walls. Shi-Chi paused, rubbed the goosebumps on his arm, then continued, "There are fossils of ancient organisms in the rock which spawned a watermelon-sized insect, as shown by the child who discovered the cave. However, it was not complete. It was only a portion of the remains. But even so, according to the researchers' theories, if that organism were still living, it could indeed be as big as a watermelon. Moreover, its appearance would also be quite close to the child's descriptions." It sounds incredible, however, was the child the only one who saw it, and others didn't see insects crawling out of their walls? Xiao Xuan was a bit drawn in. Shi-Chi shook his head. "I don't know. Let's go ask in a while when we get there. We're almost there anyway." When the group of people arrived at their destination, it was already noon, 11 o'clock. Xiao Xuan followed Shi-Chi and the others and ate a simple lunch, then returned to the bus. Shi-Chi and the others were already impatient. After eating, they did not rest and planned to immediately start working. Shi-Chi had already told Xiao Xuan the things he needed to pay heed to, which things couldn't be touched, which places couldn't be gone to, who to find when he needed someone, etc. Xiao Xuan had a plan in his heart. "I'll talk to you after work today. Take a stroll by yourself for now. The scenery in this place is quite nice, green mountains, blue skies and waters. Clean out your lungs after staying in the smoggy city." After speaking, Shi-Chi took his tools and followed his instructor. Xiao Xuan was not allowed in that place, but he did not have much interest going there regardless. Only Xiao Xuan was left in the bus. After closing the windows and doors of the bus, it was fairly quiet. In the past few days, Xiao Xuan hadn't gotten good sleep, and on the road, he was listening to Shiki's narrations. Now that it was silent, he was sleepy. When he woke up, it was nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Xiao Xuan planned to head out for a walk. Just as he planned to do that, he saw Shi-Chi in work clothes walking over. He went in the bus and grabbed a document. Afterwards, he continued to hurry over and work. However, before leaving the bus, Shi-Chi took out a chicken egg-sized stone and threw it to Xiao Xuan. "I picked it up from the cave, and as they weren't paying attention, I grabbed it. It shouldn't be anything important. I cannot give you antiques, but regardless, this stone was still found in the cave. It even looks quite smooth. Someone probably threw it over there, but I'll give it to you as a remembrance." The stone was found near the cave entrance, and was some distance away from the core of the cave. The quality of the stone was also clearly different from the other objects dug out, and there lacked any marks on it. So, the people who came in the first batch focused on the murals and Stone Age's antiques. No one cared about the piece of stone near the cave entrance, and for the sake of amusement, Shi-Chi smoothly obtained it. After catching the thrown stone, Xiao Xuan looked at it carefully in his hand. The feeling of it was no different from other stones, dark green, chicken egg-shaped, a rather sleek surface, as if it were polished carefully. There was nothing odd at a first glance, and even though it wasn't any antique, it was decent as a small toy, or as an ornament. Xiao Xuan did not mind it. After playing around with it in his hands for a while, he felt that the stone could not be warmed up. After a dozen or so minutes in his hands, it was still quite cool. Thinking about it, Xiao Xuan took out a lighter and used fire to burn the stone. Logically speaking, the places that the flames came in contact to should be slightly scorching. But the reality was after burning, it was still as cool as before. Sweeping his gaze at his surroundings, Xiao Xuan took a fruit knife from the table and laid a piece of paper. He planned to use the knife to scrape off a few bits and take it to the archaeology bus and ask someone to help him examine it. However, after scraping the stone with the knife, not even the faintest of traces were left behind. There was not even a scratch from jabbing it with the tip of the knife. Cannot be heated by fire, cannot be marked by a knife, it was truly an odd stone. Xiao Xuan walked down the bus with the stone, planning to let Shi-Chi look at it carefully later. The bus stopped at a fairly close distance from the village. It was just that the road was not too suitable for walking. Some of the villagers in the village had went to work, and those a bit more leisure went to the newly discovered cave for the liveliness. As such, when Xiao Xuan entered the village, he only saw a few people walking around. Around the village was a 2-meter-tall wall made from rock and dirt. It was said to be built several dozens of years ago for protection against wild beasts. The rocks came from the mountain, however, there weren't many large beasts recently, so no one paid any more attention to the stone wall. Glancing at it, he could see the wall's large pieces of rocks. It had a long history, bringing about a feeling of desolation. Xiao Xuan played around with the stone in his hand, his eyes staring at it. Hearing about the discovery of ancient organism fossils in the wall's rocks, Xiao Xuan recalled the watermelon-sized insect Shi-Chi spoke of. He was just planning to shift his gaze away when suddenly, Xiao Xuan saw a snake-like thing appear on the wall. It was even squirming around. As thick as a small water tank, and its scale-like patterns emitted a cold glint. It was several meters away, but Xiao Xuan felt a chill go down his spine, and all his hair stand on end. It frightened him so much he almost leapt into the air. Yet, when Xiao Xuan blinked and looked back, he discovered absolutely nothing. The rock wall was still the broken rock wall that took many years of beating from the weather. Illusion. Xiao Xuan looked at the other places of the wall. Afterwards, his line of sight fell upon a hole in the wall. There was a large rock over there, left behind after the wall at that area collapsed. The small parts were taken by the villagers back home to build their own walls, the larger ones were left untouched. And, at that moment, Xiao Xuan saw a green-colored sprout pop up from the rock. The sprout quickly bud leaves and grew tall. At the same time, several vines extended outward towards all directions. The initially 3-meter-tall hole was instantly filled by the vines and leaves. A fragrance belonging to plants even permeated the air. Xiao Xuan took several steps back, breathing deeply. Focusing his eyes and looking back, he discovered the vines and branches had disappeared. The rock wall was same as usual, but the ground was full of the large smooth stones. Feeling some strange movement in his hand, Xiao Xuan looked down at the stone. The stone that could not be heated up nor could be scratched became sand in a split moment. They slipped through the gaps between Xiao Xuan's fingers. When the final speck of sand fell, Xiao Xuan's vision went pitch black. In a cave, lying down everywhere in disorder were 20 children. A layer of thin, ragged hide covered around 7 children. The others who weren't covered by the hide either had their own, or they had to shrink in a ball at the side. But no matter if they were covered or shrunk into a ball, they sleep very soundly. Since it hadn't been cleaned in a long time and there were many people sleeping, there was a very heavy stench lingering about the cave. In their surroundings, there were bore air vents, allowing sunlight to enter, which barely permitted some light in the dark cave. Underneath the air vent, on one side of the cave, a young child clad in torn hide was sleeping there. However, he was different from the others. There was also a large dog that slept by his side, nearly the same size as him. Xiao Xuan opened his eyes. Seeing the sunlight that had already shone to his shoulders, he rubbed his eyes, crawled up, and tidied up the dry grass laid underneath him. Seeing Xiao Xuan's actions, the large dog with initially closed eyes quickly rose and obediently knelt by his side so as to let Xiao Xuan pick up the dry grass it was just on. After bundling the grass together, Xiao Xuan walked out of the cave with one hand holding the bundle of dry grass, and the other holding the dog leash, which was made out of rope. Arriving at such a primitive tribe-like area in such an ineffable manner, becoming a small brat in the tribe located in the desolate wilderness. This body was very weak, as it likely hadn't been able to heal from an illness. Ever since Xiao Xuan woke up from that body, over half a year had passed. Even if he didn't get used to it, he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Only survival was the most important. Xiao Xuan never would have expected to truly come to a place like that. There were great differences from the primitive tribes of the Stone Age he had learnt from before when it was compared to this. Their appearances did not look anything special, but their essence was different. Have you ever seen an ordinary person carrying a small water tank-sized rock with a single hand scrolling around aimlessly on the streets? Have you ever seen an ordinary person jump 3 stories high without the assistance of any tool, and stand stably after jumping down from a 10-meter-tall tree? Xiao Xuan had never seen that in his past life, but in this one, he sees it every day. As for the cave he just came out of, its original name was Lying Down Cow Cave because the appearance of the cave was like a cow that was lying down. It was named by the tribe shaman back then, however, 1,000 years had since passed. As the years and months replaced one another, the tribe as it reproduced built houses outside the cave. As a result, the cave was used as a place for orphans that were taken in by the tribe. Henceforth, it was named as the Children's Cave by the tribe's people. The children who lived inside had no parents to take care of them, nor were there anyone in the tribe who were willing to take them in as their own. So, all in all, the Children's Cave was the tribe's orphanage. After Xiao Xuan arrived at that place, he hadn't seen people from other tribes. Which meant in the vicinity of their mountain range, there was only one tribe, their Flaming Horn tribe. In the isolated tribe, it was a life of self-sufficiency. Whilst pulling the dog, Xiao Xuan walked about in leisure. Shortly after, he saw an incongruously sized wooden house. Some of its components were also wood combined with things such as rocks, grass, and dirt. In comparison to the one before, this one, made of wood and rocks, was slightly larger, and it looked also a bit sturdier. That house could be counted as a mansion, located near the foot of the mountain. But no matter if it was the wooden houses or the wooden and rock mansions, in Xiao Xuan's eyes, they were constructions that were horrendously simple. However, after staying there for such a long time, Xiao Xuan did yearn for a wooden house that belonged to himself. But that stage could not be realized. At that time, there were already people starting to move about. The men had already took out their stone tools for grinding, so it'd be more convenient the next time they went hunting with already sharpened stone knives. The women too had their own work, sewing hides, drying foods, etc. When Xiao Xuan passed, quite a few people's gazes looked over. Not at Xiao Xuan, but at the organism Xiao Xuan was pulling. In their eyes were drooling and greed as they swallowed their saliva. In their perspective, Xiao Xuan was pulling a huge chunk of meat, enough for them to have several meals. The eyes of those who woke up early to work yet still had an empty stomach turned green. However, after they saw the thing worn around its neck, they, unwillingly, endured their longing to take the wolf away. That was the marking tile of the shaman, meaning it belonged to the shaman. They did not dare to touch it. In their eyes, Xiao Xuan was also merely helping the shaman to look after the wolf. Yes, it was actually a wolf by Xiao Xuan's side. It was born within the mountain ranges, but when it was young, a warrior hunting from the tribe found it. He brought it back so Xiao Xuan could eat it, but coincidentally, the tribe shaman passed by, left a marking tile that had the marking of a shaman, then departed. Xiao Xuan named the wolf Caesar, the name in which Xiao Xuan named his former life's dog. He raised Caesar like he did a dog, all the way up until the present. The thoughts of the people there were very odd. Clearly, they respected the shaman quite a bit, yet their attitude when facing Xiao Xuan did not change much even after seeing the shaman giving a marking tile to Xiao Xuan. The only thing different was them holding out on their desire to cut Caesar up and eat it. As for the other areas, they did nothing more than what they'd usually do. After all, the shaman did not tell everyone to help Xiao Xuan. Where would such a grand character such as the shaman have time to pay attention to a child? As time passed, all of them got used to a child that had a wolf. And, ever since Caesar was a wolf cub who didn't even have a complete row of teeth, the shaman hadn't appeared again. But what made the people near the foot of mountain baffled was why did Xiao Xuan call Caesar a dog? And, what was a dog? However, that question did not linger for long because no one paid attention to it. They didn't bother paying attention to it, as they were busy focusing on other things, food. Xiao Xuan was already used to the surrounding gazes. As though nothing were happening, he continued pulling Caesar and walking. Even if the tribe's people were greedy, they would not go and rob the shaman's things. As Shichi had said, shaman's position in tribes was very high. As for why the person residing on the mountains area for influential people, the shaman whose position was the highest, or second highest, in the tribe, would give Xiao Xuan, who slept in the children's cave, a very lowly existence, such an important marking tile, it was due to a term Xiao Xuan mentioned back then raise. Originally, Xiao Xuan said back then to raise the little wolf cub Caesar before eating it, and coincidentally, the shaman heard those words. He allowed Xiaoxuan to raise it, and in order to prevent the others in the tribe from taking it away, the shaman left a marking tile for Xiaoxuan, which was put over his neck. The shaman had great interest in raising, but in over half a year, the old man hadn't even appeared once. As a result, the impression Xiaoxuan had on the old man was an irresponsible old swindler. Was it easy raising a wolf? Every day, he was being glared at by the people surrounding him. Without a powerful mental endurability, he would have already gone insane. In short, raising Caesar was completely because of a coincidence. How difficult was life? Although the tribe took care of the food issue in the children's cave, he was still hungry. Xiaoxuan helplessly sighed. He looked forward, then the corners of his eyes twitched. Before him on his shoulder, a person was holding a stone club, 2 meters long in the shape of a baseball bat, yet a lot thicker. That was really quite heavy, and according to Xiaoxuan's past life standards, even if he could lift it up it would be very tiring. Yet, that person seemed to hold it as effortlessly as holding an ordinary hoe. With yawns, he languidly walked on the mountain, probably heading to the hunter group in order to discuss the matter of hunting. That is a normal person in this place. As for Xiaoxuan, he belonged in the weak collection of people who hadn't have their power of totem awakened. When he reached around 10 years old, his power of totem would be awakened, and only then would he count as an ordinary warrior who had the ability to hunt outside. The power of totem was the only level of measure that determined if one were able to become a hunting warrior or not in the tribe. As for what exactly was the power of totem, Xiaoxuan did not know. Perhaps he would understand when the time comes. At that instant, the uncle before Xiaoxuan, who was carrying a stone club with an appearance of sleepiness, had simply not seen the hide he wore as shorts nearly slid down to his knees. In broad daylight, he continued scroll about as though nothing were wrong. There were no reactions from the surrounding people when they saw it either. Xiaoxuan held it in, but ultimately, still said, "The uncle who's carrying a club in front, your pants are slipping." Only after Xiaoxuan's third yell did the person in front of him turn around with a yawn. He glanced over Xiaoxuan, his line of sight pausing on Caesar for around half a minute, then looked down at his slid pants. Afterwards, he calmly pulled them up, fastened the belt, and continued walking towards the mountain with the club on his shoulder. Xiaoxuan no longer said anything. In the perspective of the tribe's people, etiquette. Shame. What's that? Can you eat it? If you can't, what the hell is the point of talking about it? Xiaoxuan's destination was not at the top. He walked towards the back of the mountain along a road scattered with gravel. Right after, he climbed a short distance. Reaching the other side of the mountain, he raised his eyes and looked up. Endless mountains stretching into the distance covered with forests entered into his view, among which a few hills, relatively blank and bare, with few plants. These hills were training grounds for hunting warriors in their tribe as well as the main source of stone they used. Due to the stones, the place was not suitable for plants but was indeed a fine place for training. Xiaoxuan was standing on a gravel yard. The gravel was made out of smashed stones instead of naturally formed ones. All useful stones that could be produced into stoneware had already been picked up by others in the tribe and the rest were just worthless slag, and so no one would usually visit. It was quiet, but still, clangs could be heard from hills nearby. Xiaoxuan himself had never seen a totemic warrior's training. It was said that the destructive force created by totemic warriors was so great that the vulnerable people, like Xiaoxuan at this age, were forbidden to come close. Many have tried to watch the training in silence but were eventually hurt by mistake. Xiaoxuan looked away and loosened the straw rope in his hand. "Now go and eat your noodles." Caesar was already tempted and instantly began to run around the gravel yard. Sniffing around as he ran, he promptly used his forelimbs to dig into the gravel upon smelling something. Before long, he pulled a large worm the length of a foot and the thickness of an adult's thumb out from the digging spot. Caesar swallowed it immediately and went on looking for another one. Those worms were called stone worms by the people of the tribe. They looked like earthworms, yet much larger in size. The one Caesar just ate was a relatively small one, for Xiaoxuan had seen a stone worm as thick as a human's arm. It is said that there were larger ones. However, the larger a stone worm grows, the deeper it buries itself underground, so there were only small ones left amongst the surface. Stone worms tasted rather bad and many people would suffer from severe diarrhea after eating them, so no one from the tribe would keep stone worms on their menu. This was actually good news to Caesar since he had a strong appetite for stone worms. Being a wolf, it's rather sad that he had to stoop to eating worms. Xiaoxuan found a suitable place to air dry the bundle of grass. He tied the grass down so that it would be more comfortable to sleep on when they got back to the cave at night. After laying the grass down, Xiaoxuan glanced around and made sure that he was the only one there. He came to a short tree at the edge of the gravel yard and began to clear the surface layer of the gravel, digging underground with the roughly built stone knife that was hanging from his waist. Soon, he uncovered an even more roughly built stone container, with a piece of meat jerky in it. Xiao Xuan quickly took out the jerky and buried the container just as it was. The meat jerky was dry and fishy, and only the size of half a hand. Xiao Xuan in his last life would never have taken a second look at it, but now after starvation had settled in, rubber-tasting food became a delicacy. You see, a plain life like that, such as our fate. Xiao Xuan felt vigorous again after eating and stood up to do a few stretches. After that, he practiced the fitness boxing he remembered from his last life. Every day, Xiao Xuan would exercise, for the body he awoke in was quite weak. Meanwhile, Caesar was still digging for worms with no lower vigilance. He would constantly look up and pay attention to the surroundings. This was the reason why Xiao Xuan dared to take out food in the open, for if he was caught, the food would be taken to satisfy the hunger of others. Xiao Xuan was alone, helpless, sallow and emaciated. He would neither have the spirit nor the courage to walk out of the cave if it weren't for the experiences he had in his last life and the ruthless mind he developed in this one. After practicing fitness boxing for a while, Xiao Xuan stopped to catch his breath, only to notice Caesar suddenly turn his head with half a stone worm still in his mouth. The sudden turn of his head had torn the worm into two parts and the other half quickly burrowed back into the ground. A stone worm could still heal its wound and grow into a complete one after some period of time. The other half in Caesar's mouth was twisting its body, lashing Caesar's mouth. Caesar did not swallow the worm or care about the worm's thrashing. Instead, he stared in one direction growling, indicating that someone was there. Xiao Xuan figured that it should be someone he knew, for Caesar did not bare his teeth. Xiao Xuan also stared in the same direction, and very soon, he heard a soft sound, like wind blowing leaves on the ground. Gradually, a figure appeared in Xiao Xuan's sight. It was a very tall, big man with fine but simple clothes of hide and fur. On his clothes was a layer of stone chips and on his face, a few scars, giving him a ferocious look. There were also scars visible on the parts of his body not shielded by his clothes. A ring of carefully selected stone tools made of fine stone was hanging on his waist. The stones used to make these tools were different from the gravel under Xiao Xuan's feet, they were harder. These could be made into much more advanced tools for hunting and were of much higher quality than the rough stone knife in Xiao Xuan's hand. If traded for meat, even the smallest tool on that ring would fetch more meat than that which could feed Xiao Xuan for days. Perhaps it was a habit of his from hunting in the woods. The approaching person walked in the same silent way, even when having no intention to hide. Caesar would not have been able to spot him at once and Xiao Xuan would never have heard the slightest sound if he truly wanted to conceal himself. Before Caesar ceased his growling, he immediately tightened his body, revealing 4 long fangs as the approaching man gazed at him for a moment. Not even the remainder of the stone worm's split body falling to the ground from his mouth distracted his attention. To hunting warriors in the tribe, beasts were just prey, food. Naturally, Caesar fell into this category. Although the approaching person only gave him a glance without threat, he exuded a very dangerous aura that frightened Caesar at once because of his hunter's instinct. Given the situation, Xiao Xuan knew he had to speak first. "Good morning, Uncle Mai." The middle-aged strong man withdrew his gaze from Caesar and looked toward Xiao Xuan. The dangerous atmosphere from earlier faded, Xiao Xuan's tension eased. In fact, most warriors in the tribe would not harm children unless provoked. Mai looked at Xiao Xuan and then looked down at the marks on the floor that Xiao Xuan made with his earlier exercises. Glee filled his eyes, but his smile did not soften his face because of the scars. Xiao Xuan knew that Mai was kind and friendly, not as scary as he seemed. Also, Mai and his current body's father were in the same hunting team, so for old time's sake, Mai would always help Xiao Xuan. "You came out so early, Xuan. It's good that you want to practice before it's time," said Mai. People in the tribe did not have family names and most people were named with only one word. Perhaps it was more convenient for others to memorize and Xiao Xuan's body in this life was called Xuan. When in Rome, do as Romans do. Xiao Xuan got used to this gradually. As for the it had an interesting origin. There once was a highly respected ancestor who tended to shout out the word before he called someone's name. This developed into a tradition, passed on through generations, and so people in the tribe today would all call out the word before one's name. Of course, the rule could not be applied to seniors and those who had special positions. Only very few people who lived near the mountain, including children from the orphan cave, would come out to exercise during their youth. Basically, their lives revolved around eating and sleeping. Their luxurious entertainment would be playing for a short while. This was because exercising and playing both require the exertion of the body, and too much movement would cause hunger to develop quicker. For the poor, the less the consumption the better, so even adults were in favor of this. However, Mai obviously approved Xiao Xuan's action, for it would be more beneficial in the future if he started to practice now. Are you returning from the training ground, Uncle Mai? Asked Xiaoxuan. Yes. Mai nodded. No fixed timelines were settled for warriors to train, they could arrange their training as they pleased as long as they did not miss the hunt. It seems that Uncle Mai had good fortune today. By the way, Uncle Mai, I heard from Lenga that tomorrow it will be your team's turn to hunt. Good luck with that, and I wish that you will return fully loaded. Lenga was in the same hunting team with Mai, and he was the one who brought Caesar to Xiaoxuan. The name Lenga meant ground bow in the local language. Lenga was a person deserving of this name. Mai smiled at Xiaoxuan's words. He did not say much and prepared to leave, for tomorrow he would go hunting and it might be days before he returned. He needed to rest so that he would be energetic in the morning. Mai stopped after a few steps and turned around. Xuan. Xiaoxuan looked at Mai and saw him retrieve a piece of meat jerky from his animal hide bag. Warriors would bring their own food when they trained because there were only stones and rocks on the training ground, so few plants and even fewer animals present there could be considered as food. In order to replenish their fatigued bodies, they would prepare some food ahead of time. The meat jerky Mai held in his hand was prepared early, and he had planned to eat this small leftover piece on his way back. Upon unexpectedly meeting Xiaoxuan, he gave it to him without a moment's hesitation. Xiaoxuan was not permitted to go out hunting as it was forbidden for children in the tribe to do so, for their own protection. Thank you, Uncle Mai. Xiaoxuan said. Food was scarce in the tribe, especially in this season, and not everyone would be so generous as to hand out meat like Mai did. Mai said after he gave Xiaoxuan the meat. At the hillside where I train myself, sunset can be observed. Mai left after he shared the location of his training ground in detail, and exhorted Xiaoxuan to be extra careful. Caesar relaxed after Mai's figure disappeared into the distance. Looking down, he was very angry to find that the half of the stone worm he had dropped already slipped away. Caesar dug down deep and tried carefully tracking its scent as if trying to recapture its prey. However, Xiaoxuan was apathetic to this, as he had a chance to quench his appetite for witnessing Mai's training grounds. Xiaoxuan buried the stone container with the meat jerky inside that he got from Mai and laid a layer of stone chips on the top to disguise it. He called for Caesar, looking in the direction that Mai pointed out. Come, Caesar. Let us do something bold. Since this area was the main source of stone for the tribe, surely there would be plenty of fine stones which could be easily made into tools. Naturally, totemic warriors were privileged with the first choice of stones to be gathered, since it was their training ground. Afterward, the weaker people, including Xiaoxuan, would have a chance to pick up the leftovers. The phrase sounded quite demeaning, though it described the situation perfectly. Normally, others in the tribe would pick up the leftovers upon the hours of dinner, when it was almost sunset. This was because only at that time would the majority of the warriors stop training and rest. However, in other times of a day, the training ground would become a rather dangerous place for those who had not awakened their totemic power. The stray stones scattered by the smashing of the totemic warriors' fists against rocks were basically bullets for the vulnerable. Thankfully, with Mai's earlier instructions, it would be much easier and safer for Xiaoxuan to reach the destination. A fine stone could trade for a lot, and Xiaoxuan certainly did not intend to let the opportunity slip away. Together with Caesar, Xiaoxuan traveled the road which Mai pointed out earlier. While doing so, rumbling sounds came from the training hills, stones being shattered somewhere. From above, in the direction of alternate paths, much larger stones were rolling down the side of the mountain. It would be very risky if Xiaoxuan were to have walked there in the instance that Mai had not informed him of the safe route. Xiaoxuan continued walking as he casually fixed his messy hair and shook off the stone chips caught onto his clothes. The place Mai trained himself was close to the top of the hill. Since this was the totemic warrior's training ground, no gentle path had been excavated and it proved to be difficult to traverse. Xiaoxuan's arms, hands, and feet were bleeding when he finally reached the correct area. The wounds did not concern Xiaoxuan, for they would heal after a few days' rest. It would all be worth it if he managed to find some fine stones. It took a lot of strength to reach this place, and Xiaoxuan definitely would not have been able to climb the mountain if he hadn't eaten breakfast this morning. Stones of different sizes and various shapes were lying on the uneven ground, while on the opposite side of the cliff there were holes of different depths with traces of indentation at the edges of the rock face. Xiaoxuan assumed that there must have been harder stones embedded in the holes he found before Mai dug them out and brought them back with him to make hunting tools out of. Hard and fine stones were not widely distributed in the mountains. In fact, they would be formed into clumps, with some of them on the surface of the mountain and some buried deep inside. Warriors could not tear up the mountain, so finding these fine stones would ultimately depend on their luck. This is why Xiaoxuan earlier made the remark that Mai had good fortune when he returned. Aside from the holes, there were fist and foot marks on the cliff. This was where Mai trained himself. Totemic warriors developed particularly hard fists. Xiao Xuan would break his fist if he struck even the most vulnerable part of the cliff, while the stone would remain intact. The hardest stones with suitable shape were already picked out by Mai. Mai aimed for those which consisted of advanced materials, but there were still some stones of an average quality left which Xiao Xuan could use. Without a second thought, Xiao Xuan made Caesar responsible for surveillance, while he took his time to find stones which could be traded for food. He had to hurry before someone else arrived to rob him of his findings. Xiao Xuan picked up a long shard of stone. It was half a foot in length with an irregular shape and not particularly large or heavy. Xiao Xuan knew that the quality of a stone did not depend on its weight. There were many types of stone present here that Xiao Xuan hadn't seen in his former life. Even employing common sense from his past life would prove to be useless in this world. All the knowledge Xiao Xuan mastered was still new to him. He accumulated this from his experiences over the past 6 months. Unlike the experienced warriors, who could evaluate and grade a stone by its texture and appearance, Xiao Xuan knew nothing of how to identify a stone's quality, for he had no rich experience in this field. So he utilized a primitive method in which he would find a stone of suitable shape to work on and use his stone knife to hack at it to see if it would leave a mark on the stone. Normally, the shallower the engraving, the better the quality of the stone. Xiao Xuan raised his knife high and struck the edge of the stone. After a loud crack, a slight mark was made on the stone. Xiao Xuan was very delighted, for he identified that it could be made into arrow or spearhead. Stoneware armor smiths could decide what to make the stone into. All Xiao Xuan needed to do was to find a good one and trade the stone in for food. After placing the stone into his animal skin bag, riddled with several holes, Xiao Xuan planned to keep looking. However, Caesar detected something abnormal. Xiao Xuan carefully moved towards Caesar and looked in the direction that he was indicating. There were 3 kids, about 10 years old, stronger and taller than Xiao Xuan. Xiao Xuan's old acquaintances as well as old rivals, and they would always rob Xiao Xuan of his belongings. Those 3 little bastards. They were not from the orphan cave, but from families living in the Mountain Foot district. They would usually hang out together and began robbing Xiao Xuan only a few days after Xiao Xuan woke up in this world. At first, Xiao Xuan did not change his mindset and often did things as he did in his last life. He would hold back to some extent even when he fought back. This mercy and kindness resulted in the loss of all his meat jerky that he worked so hard to find, and the scum beat the crap out of him. Afterward, Xiao Xuan understood the reality of the situation and adapted. It was just like the first day when he woke up in the cave and looked out to find children fighting each other for food, with the eyes of wolves. Xiao Xuan then changed his attitude towards them. While recuperating, Xiao Xuan had a profound reflection and after that decided he would no longer hold back when fighting with them. The rule within their tribe was no killing and no disabling. So no one would interfere if no one was killed or disabled. The residents of the Mountain Foot district were already used to this barbaric rule. Xiao Xuan did not know if the tribal people belonged to some kind of special race. They had strong healing abilities even though they looked similar to the people from his former life. A man could stand on his own feet again after a few days' rest even after he was badly injured. After 1 or 2 months, his body would be as good as new. That was also the reason why people in their tribe did not care for fighting, for in their eyes, a fight for reasons such as this was merely a small issue that was far less important than finding food. As for the 3 kids, Xiao Xuan was neither as tall nor as strong as them and he was not as well nourished as them. What could he use to compete? It requires a ruthless mind and a strong strategy to fight, especially when outnumbered. Xiao Xuan pressed down Caesar's head a little, but Caesar was still showing his teeth fiercely towards the oncoming kids. Xiao Xuan had to squeeze Caesar's mouth and whisper, "Wait a second." Looking around, Xiao Xuan chose a hidden place for the animal skin bag containing the stone he picked up. Then he quietly moved to the back side of the cliff and said to Caesar, "You must deal with Yi, okay? You know who he is, yes." Some warrior had once said that most beasts living in the deep forests were quite smart, and the stupid ones would be even harder to train. Caesar belonged to the smart kind, and this would not be their first time working together. Even if Caesar got confused, it wouldn't matter who he dealt with, for Xiao Xuan had decided to handle the leading bastard called Sai himself, for it would be a lot easier once he knocked Sai down. Caesar kept his body close to the ground and hid behind a giant boulder. This showed he understood Xiao Xuan's command. It seemed that all wild beasts by nature are capable of stalking with stealth, pouncing fiercely and executing a fatal strike. Their instincts are aroused by hunting, even if one was a wolf brought up as a dog. Of course, Xiao Xuan did not expect Caesar to make a fatal strike, for it was forbidden in the tribe. However, Xiao Xuan would never surrender his things to anyone, especially to those 3 little bastards. Just as Xiao Xuan was immersed in his thoughts about whether he should smash his enemies with stones or hit them with his bare hands, the three kids were marching up in the mountain, unaware of Xiao Xuan's ambush. Their attention was on other aspects, for example, avoid getting hit by falling stones. They did not know which path was safe for going up, so they could only try and make detours based on the direction from where the trembling sounds were coming from. Is it really this way, Jan? Sai walked in the front of their group, and he had just evaded a stone falling from the oblique top. He glowered at the one hidden behind him, with his eyebrows lifted high. The timid kid named Jan shrank his neck and answered, "It sure is. My dad was in charge of the patrol today and he saw that Mai was coming down this way. We are getting close. There should be a lot of good stuff left since Mai is a mid-rank warrior." Sai hummed and kept going as he kicked the stone falling beside his feet. Seeing them approaching, Xiao Xuan held his breath and waited for the perfect timing. Since they have worked together multiple times, Xiao Xuan did not need to say a word but gave Caesar a gesture when the time was right. Then he made a big step towards Sai, with his right fist smashing towards Sai's forehead. Sai had a quick reaction, but he did not have the chance to fully avoid Xiao Xuan's sudden attack, even though he was the tallest one among the three. He barely dodged to one side to save his nose, but his face was still hit strongly. Before he could react again, another strike hit his jaw, which made him dizzy and he fell down. However, that was only the beginning. After a very short period of time, Xiao Xuan's fists came one after another, falling on Sai's face. Eventually, Xiao Xuan chose not to use stones to smash his enemy. Even attacking with one's bare hands could cause enough pain and suffering. People in the Flaming Horn tribe were pretty strong, and even children who had not awoken their totem power could beat most people Xiao Xuan met in his last life. He wanted to end things quickly, so he did not hold back his strength. At the same time when Xiao Xuan rushed towards Sai, Caesar jumped at Yi. Just like Xiao Xuan had trained him, Caesar bit into Yi's animal skin clothes and the straw rope on his waist, instead of biting Yi's flesh directly. Caesar kept his mouth closed and dragged Yi in the other direction. Even though Caesar was still in his infancy, he could drag a 10-year-old kid around easily, which left no chance for Yi to cause any trouble for Xiao Xuan, or to stand up on his feet. As for the third kid named Jan, Xiao Xuan intended to leave him alone for a while, for he was the timid one and could not be compared to the other two regarding body strength and ruthlessness. Jan and Yi were both shocked when Xiao Xuan had rushed forward and attacked Sai when suddenly Caesar jumped over to hold Yi before he was able to help Sai. Looking at those fangs, both Jan and Yi were so scared that they almost wet their pants, especially Yi, who had violently been dragged around by Caesar. He could do nothing but call out for help. Jan realized what was happening after a while, and then swung a wooden stick towards Xiao Xuan. Xiao Xuan was also paying attention to Zan's reaction as he kept punching on Sai's face. The wooden stick missed his head, but Xiao Xuan's back was burning in pain since he did not fully avoid the attack. He began punching Sai even faster. Sai was in fact 2 years older than Xiao Xuan, and much stronger. But he lost his combat ability under Xiao Xuan's storm-like punches. He was merely a kid with no totem power after all. Xiao Xuan breathed heavily knowing he would lose if he could not win fast. During the last 6 months, he had suffered enough from hesitating. After he had resolved the biggest problem, Xiao Xuan rolled on the ground to get away from the wooden stick. He looked at Jan with a fierce look in his eyes left from his earlier combat, which made the stick in the timid Zan's hand tremble. Jan shuddered with fear, seeing that Sai was already down, with no capacity to fight back, and Yi on the other side was also in a pretty difficult situation, all scared and shouting. He held the stick tighter but looked away from Xiao Xuan's gaze. Xiao Xuan knew that Jan had cold feet seeing his reaction, so he stood up and walked towards Jan step by step. The speed of Xiao Xuan's approach was not fast, but every step he took was like a thump in Zan's heart. And Zan's face grew darker with every thump. Between the two, Jan was the one with taller figure and the weapon, but obviously, he was the weaker one in terms of momentum. When Xiao Xuan was only a step away from Jan trembled and tossed his stick to the ground, stepping back to show that he surrendered. They had encountered each other quite a few times, and thus Jan knew at heart that Xiao Xuan would not continue fighting him once he showed the gesture, even if he had hit Xiao Xuan several times on his back earlier. Sai had just recovered a little, and he was furious and extremely upset seeing Zan's surrender. Such a dumbass. Sai knew it was bad when he found that the assailant was Xiao Xuan. Because for the past several times they had met each other, they weren't able to gain an advantage over Xiao Xuan. However, this time, he had been knocked to the ground before he could fight back. It was so frustrating. They were taking a risk here and trying their luck to see what they could find, but unexpectedly, Xiao Xuan was already here and far ahead of them. Did Xiao Xuan possess the nose of a wolf? Compared to Xiao Xuan, the three of them had come late, and what was even more humiliating was that they lost the fight as well. Thinking of that, Sai looked at Xiaoxuan as if there was deep hatred between them. Xiaoxuan ignored Sai, but he did not plan to let go of Jan so easily. He did not beat Jan as he had beaten Sai but merely kicked him down to the direction of Sai. Picking up the wooden stick from the ground left by Jan, Xiaoxuan walked toward Sai and Jan as they were lying on the ground. He weighed the stick and slowly rubbed his hands on it. The blood he on his fists from the previous combat scraped onto the stick, as he smiled at the two. Seeing that smile, Sai and Jan felt goosebumps. They wanted to run away immediately, for they were sensing that something bad would happen to them. However, Sai was lying on the ground and could not stand back up on his feet, while Jan quickly withdrew his feet to move backward. Xiaoxuan lowered his body and then abruptly he swung the stick towards them. It was sudden and it came straight to the point without the slightest hesitation. At that moment, Sai and Jan had cold sweat running all over and felt that they had lost their breath. Everything vanished in their eyes with only the stick left in the middle. Click. The stick hit the space between Sai and Jan, and it broke into pieces as soon as it touched the ground. Bits of wood flew towards Sai and Zan's faces, cutting them slightly. Xiaoxuan got closer to the two with a frozen expression. The things over there belong to me. You shall go there after I have collected them. Understood. His voice was not loud but had a strange feeling of pressure. Perhaps Sai and Jan felt that the earlier stick would have fallen on their bodies had they not surrendered. Sai remained in silence while glaring at Xiaoxuan. However, Jan was shaking like leaves in the wind, and he nodded hurriedly to show that he fully understood. In his eyes, there was still carefulness and fear. Jan thought at heart, no wonder that parents forbade their children to go near those who are from the orphan cave. Children from the cave are so horrifying. They are even more horrifying than Sai, who often fought in the past. Xiaoxuan did not plan to waste any more time on them. If Sai could come here with his friends, then others might come as well. Xiaoxuan knew that he was able to deal with those 3 kids only through tactics and that victory was achieved with the help of Caesar. Xiaoxuan would have to flee if more people or older children came. Thinking this, Xiaoxuan hurried up and collecting stones. Sai lay down nearby and rubbed his face, not caring about his swollen face or the bleeding nostrils. He glared at Xiaoxuan picking things out, but looking from that angle, he could not see clearly what Xiaoxuan had eventually collected. He was certain that he must have picked out some fine stones that could be traded for at least a few days' food. Xiaoxuan could perceive the gaze from Sai and Jan, however, he was already accustomed to that. After picking up several items, he noticed that it was already quite late and was time for him to go back. There were still plenty of nice stones left from his perspective, but he knew that he had gained enough for a day. Collecting too much might not be a good thing for him, especially when he was still young and vulnerable. He might lose them all if he had too much. His current strength wasn't enough. He needed to have the patience to wait for that so-called totem power to be awakened. After calling Caesar back to make sure he was safe after being dragged away by Caesar, Xiaoxuan left with his stones packed in animal skin. By the time he staggered back, he saw Sai lying on the ground with blood on his face and gritted teeth. Jan was next to him, still trembling with fear. Sai recovered a little and got his breath back. Immediately he commanded Yi and Jan to see if they could find any fine stones that could be traded. He murmured something quite offensive and swore to get his revenge by beating up Xiaoxuan and rob away all his possessions the next time they encountered each other. What they didn't know was that not far away, some warriors witnessed the whole incident. But they had also left one after another after Xiaoxuan had gone. Who was that lad? A young warrior asked his companion curiously. You mean the one with that wolf? I believe he is called Xuan and lives in the cave near the Mountain Foot district. As for the wolf, you'd better keep your hands off of it, for that belongs to a shaman. The older warrior warned. He did not know if there was some hidden meaning in the shaman's act, nor did he care. He just needed to know that the wolf belonged to a shaman and could not be hunted down. And in his perspective, that kid was merely keeping the wolf for the shaman. The younger warrior grasped his messy hair covered in stone chips. I won't be thinking about a shaman's things. Haha, I was just thinking about that kid there. Based on how he acted just now, I think he would be a good warrior after he awakens his totem power. Perhaps we could recruit him into our hunting team. It's still too early, and that can wait for at least 2 to 3 years. I believe those several kids from your mountainside district are not bad, but for children from the cave, the older warrior shook his head and did not finish his words, yet anyone could sense the meaning hidden behind his sentence. The tribe was roughly divided into 3 main districts, and the stronger a warrior, the higher the district he would be living in. The mountaintop district was the central spot of their tribe. It had been said that the tribe's fire pit was located there, and it was also the coldest area. In the eyes of many warriors, children from the cave possessed poorer qualifications than children living around the mountain foot district, and they could not awaken their totem power as early as others. Even if they have grown old enough to awaken totem power, they would not be easily accepted by most hunting teams. Teamwork is considered to be the most essential part when it comes to hunting, and any weak link could bring unexpected tragic consequences. Xiao Xuan did not know about the warriors' talk, nor their opinions about him. But he already knew that someone must have been around, observing. Because he had heard things and had the ability to speculate. Although warriors would not care about the surroundings while they trained, they were quite sensitive when they were resting. The noise here must have drawn the attention of a few warriors, and they were probably standing nearby when Yi shouted out for help. It's just that warriors would not intervene easily. And Xiao Xuan was certain that they would keep on observing from the side as long as the situation was under control. Just as earlier when Xiao Xuan pounded the wood stick down to the ground, if Xiao Xuan had aimed at Sai or Zhan, perhaps warriors would have stepped in to intervene because Zhan and Sai's lives were at risk based on that strength. Which meant that Xiao Xuan would have given them a much worse impression of being impulsive, and that would do Xiao Xuan no good if he intended to continue living in the tribe. So that strike was just a threat and warning to Sai and Zhan. Xiao Xuan returned fully loaded. The patrolling warriors and guards who were guarding at the edge of the residential areas were only asking a thing or two, seeing Xiao Xuan's bulging animal skin bag. They would not try to rob his harvest, for they did not necessarily see Xiao Xuan's things as valuable enough. Back on the gravel yard where he exercised that morning, Xiao Xuan picked out 2 pieces of stone for sale and buried the rest. He did not have the time to handle those stones, and he would be an idiot to bring them back to the cave. Inside the cave, there were a bunch of starving wolf cubs, who would try to fight for every bit of meat or thing. Therefore Xiao Xuan never hid food or anything that could be used for trading in the cave. He sat on the ground to rest after he hid away his items. Both the climbing and fighting were really tiring. Xiao Xuan looked at the distant mountains and then looked back at the residential areas of the tribe. He stared at the houses near the mountain foot district and then looked down at his fists with dry blood. It was only half a year, and he had become a savage person like a caveman. The pressure to stay alive surely added to accelerate the assimilation into a savage. What had it been like in civilized times? Xiao Xuan had a few dreams at night, but the scenes got more and more blurry as time went by. But it had only been less than a year. Even though life here was a little bit better compared to the primitive barbarians who used to eat human beings, as Shi Lin once described, it was not that much better. Once upon a time, Xiao Xuan would try to mediate when he saw parents disciplining their kids, and sometimes he would even get into a fight when he saw parents beating up their children. He would have never hurt children, but what about now? Sure, the environment was different, and the children in the tribe were not the same as the children from his past life. Even if they were at the same age, their characters had much in difference. Take kids from the orphan cave, for instance. Even if you beat them down this time, next time they would still come up and fight when there's food, with even fiercer attitude and harder fists. When they are controlled by their emotions, no one would ever hold back like Xiao Xuan. Wood or stone, they would use whatever by their hand as a weapon when they fight. One shall only lose if he has even the slightest mercy in his heart. For example, Jan was trembling and he was afraid earlier, but next time, he would still swing his weapon at Xiao Xuan and try to rob his things together with Sai. For God's sake, the first day when Xiao Xuan woke up from a coma, it was the time when people were distributing food in the cave. Xiao Xuan thought that perhaps he had fallen into a wolf's cave when other kids were staring at each other with hatred. They were all kids from 6 to 13 in age, and only a few of them were 13 years old. Savageness is contagious. After he had enough rest, Xiao Xuan used 2 fine stones to trade with a stoneware crafter and got 4 meat jerkies back, 2 with bones and the other 2 without bones. He gave Caesar the jerkies with bone and ate one without bone himself. The last meat jerky, he used to trade for a cheap animal skin in medium size. Winter was coming and he had to prepare early. He returned to the orphan cave, just when food was about to be distributed. The man in charge had already prepared the food and stored it within a giant stone crock. Only those with totem power could have the strength to lift a stone crock that large. The tribe would bring food to the orphan cave until the children there awakened their totem power and left to build their own house. Sometimes there was meat on their menu, but there was not enough, and could only maintain the basic living needs of children, for meat was hard to obtain. Besides meat, usually their food would be plants, for example the red-haired fruit that Xiao Xuan was looking at. That was a tuber from some trees in the color of red-brown, with plenty of thin root tubers on the outside, like fine hair. The big ones had the size of pumpkins in Xiao Xuan's past life, and the small ones were in the size of adult's fist. It tasted like potatoes, and one would easily feel full. The only problem is that the red-haired fruit had some side effect. Speaking of the effects, red-haired fruits are good for regulating gastrointestinal functions. In plain words, it would create lots of gas. And, the effect would be more obvious if one's only food was the red-haired fruit without meat. No meat left, only the direct side effect of farting. But that would not be so if one also ate some meat. Most children in the orphan cave only slept and ate every day, resulting in only a few children trying to go out for extra food. And with the main source of food coming from the tribe, it led to the fact that every time they ate red-haired fruit, the air quality in the orphan cave would be extremely unique and quite special. Xiao Xuan's face turned green. Hey, Xuan. Ku was in charge of distributing food and he ran towards Xiao Xuan as he saw him, with a piece of boiled red-haired fruit in his hand. That was a big piece, at least obviously larger than what the other kids were having. Ku was one of the oldest kids in their cave. He was 13 years old. There were 2 other 13 years olds, but they were not as strong as Ku, so Ku was in charge of managing the cave and he helped in distributing food every day. There were obvious advantages in taking that job, one of which was that he could have more food to eat himself. This let Ku grow much stronger than the other orphans, even looking like someone with parents. Normally Ku would not talk much with others, as he usually spent all day out and only came back to the cave when food should be served. He had not spoken much with Xiao Xuan either, but why then was he approaching him with a big piece of fruit in his hand? Xiao Xuan looked at Ku and took over the red-haired fruit. Ku was in a good mood, and he was somehow excited. Xuan, I will go to the hillside tomorrow and spend the whole winter there. You shall take over the cave. Ku said. Xiao Xuan almost threw his red-haired fruit at Ku's words. Even if Ku leaves, the cave should be taken over by other older kids. There were 2 13-year-old children and quite a few 11 and 12 years olds. Why would the job fall onto him, while he was under 10? The appointment could not have been made by Ku, so Xiao Xuan asked, who said that? Ku pointed to that person who was in charge of bringing food every day, as that one leaned against the stone crock, casually picking his teeth while shaking his toes. Looking at the children fighting for food fiercely in the orphan cave, Xiao Xuan wanted badly to grab the collar of the man in charge and shout out, "Are you f-seeking kidding me, delivery guy? Like and subscribe."